One of my favorite stories about art is told by Simon Shaw in his series, The Power of Art. In the episode about Caravaggio, he tells the story of when Caravaggio got his first church commission. It was a chapel, and he was supposed to make two paintings about the life of Matthew, so the martyrdom of Matthew and the calling of Matthew. And this was a huge commission for him because it was a chance for him to prove that he could make art that could be in the context that really mattered at the time, which was in the church. But the martyrdom of Matthew, the showpiece for the chapel, proved to be a giant headache. The commission called for this large architectural setting, the martyr with his eyes rolled to heaven, a cast of hundreds, angels and clouds. It was all stuff that Caravaggio knew he didn't want any part of, but he didn't know what to put there instead. Blocked, he ended up looking to the calling of Matthew. And when he looked to that story, a light went on in him. Why? Because the story of the calling of Matthew is a story about a sinner, whereas the martyrdom of Matthew is about a saint. And Caravaggio knew what it was like to be a sinner. Caravaggio was a pretty rough guy. He grew up poor, he was a drinker, a fighter. He actually killed a guy in a duel in his lifetime. But he was also a Christian. He really believed it. And he ended up making some of the most powerful art images that the church had ever seen in his lifetime. Because what he did is he didn't make these images about some faraway story in some holy land that was happening. He brought all of those stories right here, right now, in the present. So instead of setting the calling of Matthew in some fantasy holy land, Caravaggio takes us to a dark, dirty room in Rome. Enter Jesus and Peter, Peter hesitantly pointing where Christ's outstretched arm forcefully lets us know that it's Matthew that he's after. And here in this moment, Caravaggio stumbles across another idea. Instead of highlighting Christ, cover him up. The less we see of him, the more we see of that extended finger pointing to the man being illuminated by the light. Caravaggio wanted people to come into the space and not just see a painting of a story, but to see a painting of a real event, something that was happening right now. To Matthew, yes, but to all of us who come into the light that says, come and follow me, the light that says, you are loved, the light that says, you belong to me. In the video before this, I talked about how Christ reveals our truest song as humanity, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? This is what it feels like to be a human being. And Christ brings a revelation to us with that statement, but he also brings a new revelation to us. And I would say that as much as he gives us our truest song, he also gives us a new song, and that new song is You Belong to Me. Many of us are skeptical of this statement, and it's mostly because of our experiences with religion. See, religion says this, it says, believe, behave, belong, right? So it's asking us to believe a certain thing, and then it wants us to behave a certain way to make sure we really believe it. And when those two things are in place, then all of a sudden we get to belong to community. But Jesus does something completely different. He comes to us in our darkest place while we're doing whatever, and he goes, hey, you, come and follow me. I want you to join this crew. You belong here. And it's in that belongingness, that coming together of that community, that we go on a journey with him. And as we're going with him, all of a sudden we go, I think I believe these things. And belief takes root in us. And it starts to go into all areas of our life, and we start to change our behavior. So it's completely different with Jesus because it's belong, believe, behave. It's Jesus who gives us the belongingness. It comes from him. There is an important work that the church, when I say church, I mean the body gathered that has been awakened to our belongingness, right? That church can bring. And that is to invite and reveal the new song given to us by Jesus, to call out the light, to speak reconciliation between God and man. I mean, the Apostle Paul calls us ambassadors of this reconciliation. But this does not just come through reading words or preaching a sermon or something. I mean, this can happen in the very real experience of light shining its transforming power on us. There's such a power in a concert. I mean, you know what we're talking about when we're all there and we're gathered and we're all singing that song together. It's just like, oh, it's a uniting family experience. Or that time you've gone to a film and it's just resonating with you as a human being because it's speaking to who you are and what you're capable of and where we're going together. I mean, we're a forgetful people, and we constantly need new and beautiful things to remind us of the potential that lays before us. In the visual art realm, I discovered this with a project I did with Ecclesia. So every year we do a Stations of the Cross show, and it's in our gallery during the Lenten season. And I was trying to be far enough ahead that I could accomplish this well. And then I was meeting with the head pastor, Chris, in November, and we were talking about the show, and he goes, "Oh, I had this idea. We should do it on skin." I was like, "Do you mean a tattoo?" And he goes, "Yeah." I was like, "All right, I'll get back to you in a couple months." And that began my journey. Because look, Stations of the Cross is two things I don't want a tattoo of: Jesus and a cross. Like, Jesus. Jesus is often portrayed as a white guy. And look, I spent a lot of my 20s deconstructing the blonde, Nordic, Thor-looking guy from the Lutheran church I grew up in. And so I just didn't want to perpetuate any of that kind of stereotyping anymore. And the cross is hugely important, hugely important. But as a symbol in society right now, I don't think it has a lot of power. It's because it's everywhere. It's decorative, it's tattooed on celebrities, it's on t-shirts at clubs of people bumping and grinding to music. Like, it's everywhere that it has no meaning anymore. It's not a very powerful symbol. And so the real invitation was what is a new set of symbols that depict this story within this art form, and how could that be powerful? I remember one Sunday I saw a guy who was like completely tatted head to toe, and it turns out he's a really fantastic tattoo artist. And I told him about my project, and he just said, "Look, whatever you do, tattoo culture has a long history. Make sure that you honor that history." And he was right. When I looked it up and kind of did research, the legend goes that right outside the Garden of Eden, when Cain kills Abel, he receives a mark. And that was the first tattoo. So tattoo kind of comes from this place of being an outsider, being a criminal. And that's kind of what our parents and grandparents always say. Surprisingly, it's when I discovered about Russian prison tattoos is when everything clicked for me. In the Russian prison system, you will receive a tattoo from the other inmates when you go into it. And it's a tattoo that symbolizes your crime. And you're given it a tattoo whether you like it or not. And these tattoos are very narrative and very figurative and very grotesque and kind of appalling. It was interesting to me that it was like you are given an outward showing of your crimes. And here we have, in Stations of the Cross, we have Jesus going along with some of the worst things of humanity and taking it all on himself and giving us a way for redemption. And so my thought was these tattoos, these stations needed to symbolize the mark that we're receiving from Jesus. The mark in the solidarity he's having with us, but also in the redeeming aspect that he's giving to us. And so I aligned with some of the older art forms, and I came up with a series of images, and we presented it to the community. And I really just needed like 10 people to volunteer, because the art show was going to be not just stations, pictures on the wall, but it was going to be pictures on a person. And we had about 120 people say they were interested in getting it. And on the opening night, we had about 60 people from the community. And then CNN called, and the local media and all this stuff, and it kind of became this big thing. And it was controversial, and people hated it, and I got a lot of emails from people saying we're heretics or just idiots. But what was amazing to me was from some of the stories from the tattoo artists and the people who got tattoos. I remember this one woman from our community, and she has like full sleeves. She's a single mom. She had just moved from New Jersey. And she said, this show is really powerful to me because like my tattoos, they're all my own stories. I mean, they're about me. And I've been to many communities of faith where I didn't feel welcome to be me there. And so to have a place where I could be myself, where who I am is accepted, means a ton. I had one guy who started coming to the church, and he said, "I've wanted to journey with the community and know about God for years. I just didn't know where I could go looking the way that I do." And this is like the first community that says, you're welcome to be here as you are. What I saw is that a bridge was created. A bridge to a community that historically has been rejected by communities of faith. Through this art project, we were able to create a bridge for that community to come to the community that's founded on a person named Jesus who goes, "You belong to me."